On the day of our engagement, Caleb's female friend got extremely drunk and stayed overnight at my house. In the middle of the night, a hand suddenly reached into my quilt. I was so startled that I jolted awake. When I opened my eyes, I saw a woman wearing a camisolo. Before I could say anything, she pouted and complained, "Coca this lie. Your stupid fiancé is asleep. Now you should take good care of me. Right?" That's when I realized that her relationship with Caleb wasn't simple. I tugged at the quilt and calmly called Caleb, who was in the next room. "Come over here. It seems your good friend climbed into the wrong bed." When I felt someone groping me through the quilt, my brain froze for a few seconds. I originally thought it was Caleb who had come. Today was the day of our engagement. Even if he came into my room in the middle of the night, I probably wouldn't have refused. I had imagined countless possibilities. But I never expected that the person lying on top of me would be a woman. And this person was exactly Caleb's female friend, Vivienne. I half closed my eyes and watched her leisurely, not making a sound, in the dimly lit room. Vivienne didn't stop her actions. She still pouted and complained, "Coca this lie. Your stupid fiancé is asleep. Now you should take good care of me. Right?" Her hand reached into the quilt, and her words were laced with teasing. My heart felt as if it was being tightly gripped by a big hand. And I had some difficulty catching my breath. The stupid that Vivienne had just cursed probably referred to me. Right? Seeing that I didn't respond, she was confused for a few seconds and then climbed up a bit more. She was pressing on me so much that it was hard for me to breathe. Vivienne's voice was as soft as a puddle of water. "Caleb, you just sent me a message asking me to come over. Why aren't you talking now? Do you think it's too exciting?" I couldn't see Vivienne's face clearly, but I could guess roughly from her tone. Without even turning on the light, the green light above my head seemed to be able to illuminate the room brightly. I didn't believe that Caleb would ask her to come to the room in the middle of the night to discuss the philosophy of life. It was at this moment that I realized that the relationship between Caleb and this so-called female friend wasn't simple. The air froze for a few seconds. Vivienne tried to pull my quilt, but I held it tightly. I cleared my throat. "Vivienne, are you sober so soon?" I turned on the light with a snap. The moment our eyes met, Vivienne seemed to have lost her soul and froze on the bed. The camisole on her shoulder had somehow slipped down to her forearm. Vivienne's face turned pale instantly. "Why are you here?" I smiled faintly, pulled the quilt hard to cover myself properly. Then I picked up my phone and called Caleb, who was sleeping in the next room. "Come over here. It seems your good friend climbed into the wrong bed." There was a few seconds of silence on the other end of the phone. Then, the sound of Caleb stumbling over came from outside the room. When he burst in, he was barefoot, and his eyes were full of anxiety. Ava, don't misunderstand. I can explain this." I pushed Vivienne, who was sitting on me, away with a strong shove. My legs were terribly numb. She lost her balance and fell directly to the ground. Caleb didn't have time to catch her, so he could only watch helplessly as Vivienne tumbled down. After hitting her head on the ground, Vivienne finally came to her senses. She looked at Caleb pitifully. Her eyes filled with tears. "Caleb. My head hurts so much." Caleb pursed his lips and turned to look at me. Without the slightest hesitation, Vivienne just went to the bathroom and then got into the wrong room. "Is there any need for you to react so strongly?" Apologized to Vivienne now. So, this was what Caleb meant by explanation. I suppressed the surging soreness in my heart. I tilted my chin towards Vivienne. "Vivienne, please repeat what you said when you were lying on me just now." Caleb was stunned for a few seconds and then looked down at Vivienne in his arms. "What did you say to Ava?" Vivienne didn't answer, but just kept crying. Anyone who saw this scene would think that I had bullied her. "Vivienne said that you sent her a message asking her to come over." After saying that, I pretended to sigh helplessly. "Caleb, you really are something. Don't you know that our house is big and you might need to use a navigation app to find the right room? Remember to label the doors with numbers next time and tell her the specific room number." I waved my hand, indicating that the two embarrassed people in front of me should get out. After being said like this, Vivienne probably felt embarrassed and cried even more unrestrainedly. She nestled in Caleb's arms and cried with a pitiful look. "Caleb, That's not what I meant. Your fiancé misunderstood me. Caleb protected her behind him and took a step towards me. He had a serious face and his voice was as cold as ice. Ava, weaponizes, Ava. I just wanted to talk to Vivienne about something. It's not what you think. I showed an understanding expression. I nodded. Right. 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 Was her behavior just now the way you two friends greet each other? I leaned forward and blew on Caleb's neck. I couldn't help but click my tongue twice. It's really special. I've really learned something today. Caleb's face turned a bit uglier. And his voice was extremely low. It's not like that. I pushed him away and got out of bed barefoot. The person hiding behind Caleb had already stopped crying. She even secretly threw me a provocative look. I was so angry that I laughed. Since you said it's not like that, then it means Vivienne deliberately seduced me. Right? As soon as the words fell, I directly pushed aside Caleb, who was in the way, and slapped Vivienne. When the slap landed on Vivienne's face, she hadn't even had time to take back her provocative look. Arrogance and grievance appeared simultaneously on her seemingly innocent face. Vivienne's tears fell like beads off a broken string. Caleb, my face hurts so much. I smiled. In that case, Vivienne deserves this slap. The little bit of guilt that Caleb had towards me instantly vanished. He pulled me aside and worriedly examined Vivienne's face. Several clearly visible finger marks immediately appeared on Vivienne's fair cheek. That's right. I was the one who slapped her. Vivienne didn't explode immediately. She leaned weakly on Caleb's shoulder and explained softly, Caleb, it's not Ava's fault. It's all my fault. I got into the wrong room. I won't come to your house to stay overnight in the future. Caleb's face darkened visibly. He protected Vivienne and looked at me with a cold gaze. Ava. Vivienne is our guest. Is this how your mother taught you the way to treat guests? You really have no manners. No wonder your mother died. He stopped speaking halfway through. Swallowed the words back. I knew what the second half of the sentence he didn't say was. No wonder my mother died so early. It seemed that he finally realized it was inappropriate. Caleb lifted his eyelids and glanced at me tentatively. His tone also softened. Today is our big day. Don't be so petty with a drunk guest, okay? I'll apologize to you on behalf of Vivienne. Is that okay now? My ears were ringing. And I couldn't hear his words clearly at all. My mother had passed away. She had been in the late stages of cancer and had suffered a lot. Even though half a year had passed, I still hadn't been able to get out of the grief of my mother's death. At that time, Caleb, as my mother's attending doctor, had accompanied me for 3 years. He appeared when I was at my most vulnerable, reached out his hand to me, and said he would protect me. Caleb knew my vulnerability and sensitivity better than anyone else. The words he blurted out just now were undoubtedly a stab in my heart. My emotions instantly collapsed. And I couldn't help but roar at him, get out. Take your good friend and get out of my house. This was the house my mother left me. Since they were staying here, what right did they have to judge my late mother? I grabbed the scented candle on the bedside table and threw it directly at them. Caleb was quick and agile. He hugged Vivienne and dodged it. The scented candle hit the wall and shattered into countless glass fragments with a loud crash. Caleb completely lost his temper and shouted at me sternly, Ava. What on earth are you going crazy about? I've already said it's a misunderstanding. Why are you still holding on to it? His hand rested on Vivienne's waist. And he looked at me with a serious expression. It was as if I had deliberately caused this farce tonight. Caleb ignored my emotions that were on the verge of collapse. He draped his coat over Vivienne and put his arm around her shoulder as they went out. Before leaving, Caleb took a deep look at me. He sighed and said, Vivienne is my friend. Aren't you making me lose face by doing this? After I send Vivienne back, we'll have a good talk. You should reflect on yourself first. I sat in the bedroom and could clearly hear the sound of the car horn downstairs. Among them, there was also Vivienne's soft sobbing and Caleb's patient consolation. Vivienne. And his mother just passed away not long ago. She's been a bit sensitive recently. Like a crazy person. Don't be like her. This was the last sentence I heard Caleb say when I leaned against the window and looked down. In an instant, my heart ached as if being twisted, and big tears fell uncontrollably. It turned out that in Caleb's eyes, I, who had lost my loved one, was a crazy person. The words he had comforted me with a few days ago now seemed extremely ironic when I thought about them. The car drove out of the yard without the slightest bit of reluctance. In the 3 years I had been with Caleb, we rarely quarreled. I had always thought that Caleb and I were soulmates. A perfect match by nature. But at this moment, I suddenly realized that the truth might not be like that. The reason why Caleb and I didn't quarrel might also be because Vivienne hadn't been involved before. Vivienne seemed to be the only variable in my relationship with Caleb. She could easily make our 3-year relationship with her and become vulnerable. Vivienne had returned to the country a few days ago. As soon as she came back, she happened to run into my engagement ceremony with Caleb. At the engagement banquet, I met Vivienne for the first time. She was dead drunk and fell into Caleb's arms, with tears streaming down her face. She kept muttering, "Caleb, how could you get engaged without my permission?" Caleb just put his arm around her shoulder and didn't say a word. Actually, I didn't think much of it at that time. I just thought that they were old friends who had been reunited after a long separation and had too much to say to each other. But now, when I carefully reviewed the situation, I realized why Caleb's friends had such different expressions at that time. It turned out that without my knowledge, I had already become a laughingstock in the eyes of others. And I had even thought I was being considerate and handed a tissue to the crying Vivienne. I sat on the bed in a daze and laughed at myself. I didn't even realize that tears had already covered my cheeks. I didn't listen to Caleb and wait for him at home obediently. Half an hour after Caleb left, I made a phone call. The person on the other end of the phone was woken up, and his tone was full of annoyance. "Can't you wait until tomorrow to change the door and the lock?" I was silent for a few seconds. "No. Come now. And I'll give you an extra one. €0 as overtime pay." The person on the other end of the phone hung up immediately. More than 10 minutes later, the locksmith appeared at the door of my house, sweating profusely. The master patted the intact door. "Miss, what made you so eager to change the lock?" Leaning against the door frame, I said lightly, "There's a man who has the key to my house, and I'm worried he'll come to harass me." The master understood immediately and quickly changed a new lock. He said proudly, "Miss, don't worry. Ordinary people can't open this lock." He held up the old lock and gestured, "Do you still want this old one?" I smiled and casually gave the master €2. "Throw the old one away. I don't want it anymore." I turned around and went into the house, packed up Caleb's luggage. Then I threw it all out of the house in one go. It's not that I didn't give Caleb a chance. In the urban area at night, even if you drive from the east of the city to the west and back, it won't take more than an hour. But Caleb was gone for more than 2 hours. What did he talk about and do with Vivienne during this time? I didn't want to think about it in detail. And I didn't dare to. At 4 o'clock in the morning, I took a taxi and left home, and knocked on my best friend's door. A look of confusion flashed in Luna's eyes from staying up late. The next second, as if she suddenly understood, she pulled me in. "It's just a man. If he's no good, just dump him." Luna obviously misunderstood the reason why I ran away from home. But I was very tired now and didn't want to explain too much at all. I hugged Luna and slept until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As soon as I opened my eyes, Luna threw the phone at me with a lot of complaints. "Take a look. This mad dog Caleb has called you dozens of times. The phone ran out of battery, and I just charged it for you." I looked at the dozens of missed calls from Caleb on the phone. My heart, which had already returned to calm, was once again stirred up with ripples. Seeing me hesitate, Luna snatched the phone. "If he's no good, just throw him away. What are you hesitating for?" I forced a smile and shook my head. Caleb's first call came at 5 o'clock in the morning. It had been for hours since he left home. Coming home at this time. Why did he think I would open the door and greet him with a smile as if nothing had happened? I let Luna throw away the phone and temporarily removed Caleb from my world. In the evening, Luna and I went out for dinner. As soon as we sat down, our eyes met Vivienne's not far away. Vivienne leaned on the sofa and raised her eyebrows at me with a fake smile. I ignored her provocation, retracted my gaze and studied the menu carefully with Luna. But Vivienne obviously didn't want to let it go. She came over and pressed the menu in my hand back onto the table. I didn't expect her to be so strong that she also slapped my hand heavily on the dining table. A sharp pain shot through my hand. Ava, ending fulfilled by obsession. Didn't Caleb teach you the art of hospitality last night? Have you forgotten so soon? Didn't your short-lived mother send you a dream to teach you? The anger that had been suppressed all night finally couldn't be held back. I stood up suddenly and slapped her. I warned her coldly, my mother only taught me that for impolite people, you should treat them in the same way they treat others. What on earth is Caleb? There was nothing but anger in Vivienne's eyes. And she looked at me through gritted teeth. Just as she was about to flare up, she seemed to see something and burst into tears with a wow. Vivienne instantly changed her expression and came to grab my hand. Ava, I know you're still angry about what happened last night. I came to apologize to you out of kindness. Why did you hit me again? Can't you be reasonable? Before Vivienne could finish acting, I directly slapped her on the other side of her face. The crisp sound instantly attracted the attention of everyone in the restaurant. I didn't intend to spare her any more dignity. If you want to apologize, you should have the right attitude. Was that what you did just now, an apology? Vivienne didn't say anything more, but instead raised her chin at me as if she had succeeded. I turned around following her gaze. Caleb was standing at the door of the restaurant, holding the doorknob, with a deep look in his eyes. Ava, what do you mean by saying I'm nothing? I glanced at Caleb inferently and immediately retracted my gaze. Literally. You're not a decent person. Caleb walked over with a cold face. This time, he didn't look at Vivienne first, but lowered his head to look at me. Why weren't you at home last night? Why didn't you answer my calls? I didn't answer and sat back in my seat unhurriedly. I patted Luna, who was dumbfounded. Stop watching the excitement. Order the food quickly. Luna came to her senses and gave Caleb a fierce glare. Even though I hadn't had time to explain it clearly to her, she had already understood the general situation from the few words she heard. In this world, Luna and Caleb are probably the people who know me best. But now, the only person I can't trust is Luna. Luna turned her head and spat at Caleb. Bah. Bah. You blind thing. Caleb couldn't save face and reluctantly came to pull me. Ava, I then fulfilled my obsession. I'm asking you a question. What are you pretending to be stupid for? Luna was quicker than me and hit Caleb's hand hard with her chopsticks. Caleb, don't you reflect on yourself? What are you doing disturbing our Ava? Your female friend obviously isn't a good person. She's just pretending. Are you really blind? Caleb lost his patience. He roughly pulled me up, forcing me to look him in the eye. Only then did I notice that there was a ring of redness in his eyes at some point. Ava, why are you always so sensitive and suspicious? With your current attitude, how can I spend the rest of my life with you? This was the most serious Caleb had ever been, and his voice was extremely serious. I couldn't help but start to wonder if I was really being too sensitive. Perhaps. The sentence Vivienne said last night, "You sent me a message and asked me to come over," was just to make me angry on purpose? In fact, Caleb didn't know about it. I thought it was necessary for me to ask clearly. I felt a bit stuck in my throat. Caleb. You. The next second, my gaze shifted down to Caleb's neck. He hadn't been home since he went out last night and hadn't changed his clothes. But on the collar of his white shirt, there was a bright red lipstick mark clearly visible. My heart skipped a beat without warning. The words stuck in my throat couldn't be said anymore. That lipstick mark stabbed my eyes deeply, making me subconsciously look away. My gaze intertwined with Vivienne's without any deviation. She stood up straight with a victorious smile. Ava, stop having a tantrum with Caleb. He was really sad last night. I comforted him for a long time before he gradually felt better. When Vivienne said these extremely ambiguous words, Caleb didn't refute. He just lowered his head and looked at me seriously. At that moment, I felt like I was the complete clown. I was kept in the dark by Caleb and Vivienne and played for a fool. Caleb leaned down slightly, wanting to hear what I would say next. Ava, what did you want to say to me just now? I can tell you everything without reservation. I broke free from Caleb's hand disappointed lie and took a few steps back. I didn't feel a little bit of security until I stepped behind Luna. I took a deep breath and said coldly, "Caleb. What I want to say is that we should cancel our engagement. I don't want to marry you anymore." Caleb's expression visibly panicked. He reached out to pull me, but Vivienne grabbed his arm. "Come on, Caleb. Ava is just a little girl who likes to have tantrums. Just let her be. And she'll be fine naturally. She's really angry now. If you go to her now, aren't you just asking for trouble?" As Vivienne spoke, she tried to pull Caleb out of the restaurant while holding his arm. But Caleb was like a stone statue, not moving at all. He just repeated over and over again, "Ava. Were the words you just said from your heart?" I thought that Caleb would be overjoyed and readily agree when he heard this. Because I accidentally learned a past event from his good friend today. Caleb had liked Vivienne for 5 years. Getting engaged to me was just his second choice. This was something I had never heard of during the 3 years I had been with Caleb. I smiled as if I had let go. "It's from my heart. I don't want to love you anymore. And you don't like me anymore either." Caleb wasn't as happy as I had imagined. Instead, he looked dull and confused. He covered up his inner panic with a smile. "Ava. You're just saying angry words again." Vivienne's face darkened, and she stepped forward to argue with me. "Ava, ebbing fiancé. You're really crazy. I don't even want to make Caleb sad. Why do you treat him like this? If anyone is going to break up, it should be Caleb breaking up with you." Before Vivienne could finish her words, Luna kicked her down to the ground directly. If it were on a normal day, Caleb would definitely have been in a hurry to protect Vivienne behind him. Then he would scold me for being unreasonable. But at this moment, Caleb just stared blankly at what was happening in front of him, and didn't make any move at all. Vivienne lay on the ground in pain, curled up in a ball. "Caleb. Come and help me up. It really hurts." After a long time, Caleb finally reached out a hand to her. He reminded her, "Vivienne. I won't break up with Ava. Don't talk nonsense in front of her." I looked at their intertwined hands, and thought it was extremely ridiculous. When Luna pulled me out of the restaurant, Caleb left Vivienne and chased after us. His tone was full of hesitation and probing. "Ava, Alifa fiancé. Why can't I open the door of our house?" I stopped in my tracks but didn't look back. "Isn't it obvious? I changed the lock." "Caleb. You should have already seen the luggage I threw in the yard. Why ask when you already know the answer?" I got in the car and looked at Caleb, who was standing there in a daze. Through the car window, he was like a deserted child, extremely helpless. A few days later, I went home to pick up some things. Caleb's luggage at the door of the house was gone. And I didn't know where it had been moved. The news that Caleb and I had cancelled our engagement had spread like wildfire in the circle these days. Everyone said that I was the one who was being unreasonable and making trouble all day long. Caleb chose to cancel the engagement decisively because he was worried about affecting the next generation. Recently, several mutual friends of Caleb and me sent me private messages. They implicitly blamed me for being unreasonable. No wonder even the always calm and rational Caleb couldn't stand me anymore. Without even having to guess, I knew that this was Vivienne's doing again. I didn't reply and directly blocked and deleted the contact information of these people. They had been friends with Vivienne for more than a decade. So naturally, they wouldn't take my side. But it didn't matter now. I didn't care about these friends at all. When I went out after getting my things, I didn't see the car that should have been parked in the yard. That Mercedes-Benz was the dowry my mother had prepared for me before she passed away. Since my company was quite close, I temporarily lent the car to Caleb. Caleb had been using it for 2 years. And that night, Caleb had also driven this car to send Vivienne home. Just thinking about this made my stomach churn. I picked up my phone and decisively dialed the police emergency number. "Hello. I want to report a theft. Someone has stolen my car." The next time I met Caleb was after the police summoned him. He had clearly just come off the operating table, and there was a hint of gray under his eyes. "Iva, I think fulfilled my obsession. You know I'm really busy at work. Do you really have to use such a clumsy excuse to meet me?" In Caleb's opinion, the scene I made today was just to meet him. He pulled me into his arms. And his tone was full of exhaustion. "Stop making a fuss. I'm sorry. Let's go home. I struggled to get out of his arms. Caleb. Let me go. This is a police station. The police officer noticed my obvious resistance and sternly ordered Caleb to let go. Caleb had no choice but to release me for the time being. I hid behind the police officer and pointed at Caleb. He's the one who stole my car. And I'm no longer his fiancé. Instantly, a fierce anger burned in Caleb's eyes. Ava. Have you had enough of this nonsense? No. This matter ended with Caleb angrily handing over the car keys. When we walked out of the police station, Caleb's big hand clasped my wrist. Ava. Could you give me a ride to Yinshen Hotel? I raised my eyebrows. What? Do you need your ex-fiancé to drive you to a hotel room with your current girlfriend? Caleb. Have you no shame? Caleb pinched the bridge of his nose in frustration. Allah. It's not what you think. Tonight is Blake's birthday party. Caleb's tone was very gentle, with a hint of showing weakness. Would you like to come with me? Blake was the person who had told me the truth a few days ago. At that time, Blake looked at me in surprise and said, You don't really think Caleb likes you, do you? Do you know that Caleb was depressed for a while because of Vivienne going abroad? I knew that Caleb had been depressed before. When I first got together with Caleb, I found that kind of medicine in his medicine cabinet. But at that time, Caleb just said it was due to too much work pressure. Even when he was in an extremely low mood, I would hug him and comfort him over and over again. At that time, Caleb held me and asked if I would also leave him. I firmly shook my head and denied it. Caleb, I will always be with you. Now that I think about it, the person Caleb probably wanted to hug at that time was Vivienne, who was far away in a foreign country. Right? From beginning to end, I was just a pastime for Caleb when he was bored and lonely. I was a substitute for his first love. Vivienne. I broke free from his hand and firmly shook my head. No. Those are your friends. Not mine. I drove away in a cloud of dust. When I was almost home, I realized that I had left my bag with Caleb during the struggle just now. I turned the car around and drove directly to Yinshen Hotel. Blake's birthday party was very grand, and it was easy to find the banquet hall. Before I pushed the door open, I heard a lot of laughter and noise coming from the banquet hall. I pushed the door open a crack and saw Caleb's back. Caleb. You should be happy now. You can be with Vivienne again. Didn't you say before that Ava is just an orphan without parents? Without you, she won't have a better life than now. Hearing this, I took a sharp intake of breath. So, this was how Caleb spoke of me, and mocked me in front of his friends. Blake patted Caleb on the shoulder and comforted him again. Caleb, you're the best at manipulating someone like Ava. Why are you being so hesitant now? You should make her kneel down and apologize to you. That's right. Under the orange light, Caleb put down his wine glass and looked up at Blake. The air around him instantly turned cold, making people shudder. Was it you who blabbed and told Ava? Blake fell silent. Just as he was about to slip away, Caleb grabbed his collar. Damn it. Ava is my fiancée. In this world, only I can call her an orphan. And only I can manipulate her. You guys are not qualified. After saying that, Caleb threw a heavy punch at Blake's face. The banquet hall suddenly became chaotic. That's when I saw Vivienne, who was sitting opposite Caleb with a pale face. I pushed the door open and walked in. I just happened to see the scene where Caleb was pressing Blake to the ground and continuously throwing punches. He reeked of alcohol, and his face was extremely red. It was obvious that he had drunk a lot. I didn't say anything and held out my hand to him. Caleb's punching motion stopped, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. As if realizing something, he suddenly laughed. You've forgiven me, haven't you? He released Blake, having fulfilled my obsession, who was beaten black and blue, and reached out to hold my hand. I retracted my hand in disgust and said infuriately, Give me back my bag. Caleb got up in a sorry state and nervously adjusted his slightly loose white shirt. He changed the subject. Let's go home together. I won't associate with these people anymore in the future. I didn't tell Caleb about my contact with Blake at that time. I also didn't know how he found out about this today. I shook my head. There's the only thing my mother left me in the bag. You have to give it back to me. Caleb swept his gaze around the people present. His voice was cold. Where's Ava's bag? The onlookers scattered in all directions. Only Vivienne was still sitting there, leisurely sipping her red wine. Caleb took a long stride and walked towards her. He slapped the wine glass out of Vivienne's hand. You took the bag just now. Where did you put it? Vivienne was startled by Caleb's sudden action. She furrowed her brows. And her eyes instantly turned red. Caleb, why are you being so fierce? Caleb had run out of patience and asked again in a lowered voice. Where's my fiancé's bag? Hearing the words fiancé, Vivienne's face turned even uglier. She looked at me and said softly. I accidentally threw it into the trash can downstairs. Go and look for it. Before Vivienne could finish her sentence, a clear slap sound echoed throughout the banquet hall. Caleb's eyes were blood red, and his emotions were almost on the verge of collapse. Vivienne, who gave you the guts to throw away my fiancé's things? Vivienne covered her face in disbelief. Caleb, you hit me for Ava? Who was it that knelt down and begged me not to leave? Who called me and sent me messages over and over again during the years I was abroad? I had no interest in continuing to watch this drama of unrequited love. I turned around and left, heading straight for the trash can downstairs. In just a few minutes, Caleb chased after me. There was a bright red fingerprint mark on his face. He pulled me up from where I was bending over to search the trash can. Ava, let me look. This place is not clean. I didn't refuse. Moreover, this was something Caleb should do. Caleb had been drinking, and his steps were a bit unsteady. He knelt in the garbage scattered all over the ground and carefully searched for my bag. As a doctor, Caleb had always paid a lot of attention to his appearance. The clothes he wore on weekdays were always ironed neatly. Even before, when I asked him to carry a supermarket shopping bag, he thought it was beneath his dignity. But now, he was kneeling beside the trash can in a sorry state, rummaging through the garbage with his bare hands. When he searched the fourth trash can, he finally found my bag. Caleb excitedly held up the bag, as if expecting praise. Ava, I found it. I took the bag expressionlessly. There were several traces on the bag that seemed to have been scratched by a blade. I didn't care about it and took out the only important thing inside. Then I handed the bag back. You gave me this bag on our second anniversary. Now it's returned to its rightful owner. Caleb's smile was still on his face. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, almost imperceptibly. Ava, do you really want to break up with me so cleanly? The bond between us over the years can't be severed with just a few words. Can it? I didn't even bother to lift my eyelids. Caleb, you didn't give birth to me or raise me. How strong can the bond be? Caleb was stunned by my words. His thin lips opened, but he didn't know what to say. I had heard clearly what he said to Blake just now. There was no need for Caleb to waste any more words explaining to me now. I glanced at his swollen-side face. Now that your first love is back, why do you have to make such a mess with her, because of me? Caleb, can't you just love one person? There was an unprecedented look of panic on Caleb's face. He clamped his big hand on my shoulder, and his tone was trembling. Ava, I don't love Vivienne anymore. I just realized recently that all these years, I've only loved you. He lowered his eyes, and a teardrop fell on my face. Ava, I'll die without you. Through Caleb's eyes, I seemed to see the embarrassment and cowardice when he had desperately begged Vivienne not to go abroad. But now, everything was out of place. I couldn't hold back anymore and laughed. Caleb, you won't die. Back then, you loved Vivienne so much. But you didn't die either. Did you? Let alone for me. A substitute? I pushed Caleb away. When I turned around, I saw Luna hurrying over. She put her hands on her hips and gasped for breath. Ava, I thought you were bullied by that bitch Vivienne again. Luna trotted over, pulled me behind her, and stared at Caleb warily. Caleb, to be honest, I gave Vivienne another beating just now. You'd better go upstairs quickly, in case you don't get to see her for the last time. Caleb interrupted Luna impatiently. What does it matter to me whether Vivienne lives or dies? Luna looked at him as if she had seen a ghost. She said sarcastically, Caleb, you're really hypocritical. You joined hands with that bitch and hurt Tata to the core, and now you're pretending to be affectionate? I spit on you. Luna unceremoniously spat in his face. Caleb didn't retort, but just calmly wiped his face. Ava, the ba? I will prove my love for you with my actions. After saying that, Caleb turned around and went upstairs. I vaguely sensed that something was not right, but I couldn't say exactly what was wrong. Unexpectedly, the next day, I saw a piece of news in my WeChat moments. Caleb and Vivienne had been driving under the influence that night and had been in a car accident. Vivienne had died on the spot, and Caleb was seriously injured and in a coma. Only then did I realize that the practical action Caleb had mentioned last night was to kill Vivienne. But I couldn't feel Caleb's love at all. I just felt a chill down my spine. If Caleb loved Vivienne now, would the way he proved his love for Vivienne be to drive and kill me? I threw my phone away with trembling hands and curled up motionless on the sofa. Luna, who was all smiles when she got home after hearing the news, finally noticed something was wrong with me. She held me in her arms and comforted me over and over again. Ava, it's okay. Caleb is in a severe coma and is highly likely to become a vegetative state. I hugged my knees with both hands, and tears fell uncontrollably. I felt sorry for Vivienne. And also for myself. Although I hated Vivienne, I never thought of taking her life. Vivienne didn't deserve to die either. During the 3 years I had been with Caleb, I never realized that he was such a paranoid devil. I don't know how long I cried for. But then I looked up at Luna. Luna, I want to leave this city. Luna resigned from her job without hesitation and vowed to accompany me to roam the world. I put my only house up for sale online. And it was sold for more than 3 million yuan not long after. The price was much higher than I expected. Half a month had passed since Caleb's car accident. He still hadn't woken up. When Blake came to apologize to me, he said that Caleb might never wake up again. I didn't answer. Nor did I accept Blake's apology. In fact, the harm Blake caused me was negligible. He just took the side of Caleb and Vivienne and simply didn't like me. Before leaving, Blake seemed to have something to say but held back. Ava. Actually Caleb really loves you. When he was drunk, he called out your name. Not Vivienne's. On his birthday party, he hit Vivienne because of you. And he was never that harsh before. I put down my luggage impatiently and looked up at him. Blake, right? Do you think it's affectionate to prove your love for a new lover by hurting an old one? As Caleb's best friend, you know better than anyone that Caleb loves everyone and yet loves no one. His love is too ethereal, making it impossible for people to grasp or understand. Blake didn't continue on this topic and placed a ring on the table. This was the engagement ring between Caleb and me. Can you go and see Caleb? Seeing that I didn't say anything, he added, you don't have to be afraid. He won't wake up. In fact, I had always had a doubt in my heart. Perhaps only by seeing Caleb could this mystery be completely solved. I went to the hospital accompanied by Luna. Caleb was seriously injured, with his right leg amputated and in a severe coma. I stood far away from the hospital bed and didn't say a word. Blake dragged Luna out of the ward. In the ward, it was just Caleb and me left, along with the beeping sound of the monitoring equipment. Everyone said that Caleb was in a severe coma. I leaned forward and carefully examined Caleb, whose face was completely bloodless. He had lost a lot of weight, and there were several scratches on his sharply contoured face that hadn't healed yet. I casually pulled up a chair and sat down by the bed. Caleb, even if you do this, I still won't love you. Now I only feel fear, disgust, and hatred towards you. It's actually quite good for you to lie here for a lifetime. At least you won't feel the pain. As soon as I finished speaking, I stood up and deliberately made some noise as I walked. Just then, let out a low sigh. Caleb's eyelashes trembled slightly and became moist. His breathing was a bit uneven, and his chest rose and fell slightly. If you didn't pay attention, you really wouldn't notice it. The mystery that had been haunting me finally vanished at this moment. I calmly picked up my phone and dialed the number. I want to report. Someone was driving under the influence and committed intentional homicide. Caleb suddenly opened his eyes, his face full of disbelief. Ava, do you really hate me that much? I nodded, yes. Since Caleb had woken up, he should also bear the criminal responsibilities he deserved. I stepped back a few steps warily. You bought my house. didn't you? When the house was sold at a high price. A trace of doubt flashed through my mind. The person who came to sign the contract looked familiar to me. But I just couldn't remember who it was. Just now, downstairs in the hospital, I accidentally saw Blake's driver. It was only at that moment that I realized that all of this was a setup by Caleb and Blake. Caleb's eyes were red, and he neither admitted nor denied it. I smiled. Thank you. You made me earn an extra 800 yuan. Caleb wanted to say something more, but I waved my hand to interrupt him. You don't have to tell me. Save your energy and tell it to the police later. When I reached downstairs of the hospital, the sound of police sirens came closer and closer. Luna and I looked at each other and smiled. There was no need to say anything more.